Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on Cowboy Time Story, we ride the stories of the West Campfire truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers, gritty human, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. Redwater, New Mexico Territory, 1876. The noon sun burned the color out of everything. Cattle bawled at the stockyard fence. A ringman wrapped a mallet on the auction plank. Dust rose, turned the air into grit. Ava Nanton stood on the platform with her wrist tied. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. A crusted groove of blood cut across the skin where a bullet had kissed and kept going. Her chin stayed high. Her mouth was set. Sweat rolled down her temple, caught ash from the wind. Magnus Pike, all boots and loud teeth, spread his arms for the crowd. He patted a heifer's flank with the showman's slap. Special today, he called. Take a cow, get labor to match. Works hard, eats little. Laughter rippled. Someone whistled mean. Jonah Hale stood at the edge of the circle with a sack of flour at his feet. Tall, dark hair gone silver at the temples. He watched without moving. A vein pressed in his jaw like a line pulled too tight. He tried to turn away. He did not. Pike jerked Ava's arm to show the crowd the damage. Quiet too, he said. Already taught her that. The rope bit into her skin. Her eyes flared once, then cooled. Jonah stepped forward. How much for her? Pike squinted. Package deal, friend? Her Jonah said, not the heifer. 5 for the cowgirl goes with it. Jonah reached into his coat. Silver clinked. He set coins on the plank. 15. For the girl only. Greed beat pride in Pike's face. His lip twitched. He scooped the stack. Fine, take your charity. Jonah climbed up and cut the rope. He did not touch her except to keep her from sliding off the edge. When her feet found the ground, he let go. You're coming with me, he said quiet. Ava glanced from him to the crowd. No relief there, just a shift in the shape of the cage. She nodded once. They pushed through men and dust to the wagon. Jonah lifted his sack, set it down, then paused. Across the street behind the glass of Walter Finch's General Supply, a row of bottles stood in a neat line. Brown glass, printed labels, laudanum. Jonah looked away. He flicked the reins. The wagon rattled out of Redwater. Heat shook on the horizon, made the black line of the low ridge wobble. Chola and Yucca threw short, mean shadows. A hawk made a slow circle over dead air. Ava sat stiff hands flat on her knees. Her bare feet tucked under the bench heels raw. She watched his hands on the reins, then the road, then the creek bed that was only sand now. Do you own me? She asked. No. What do you call this then? Bad commerce, he said, and a ride. What? He kept his eyes on the road because I was there. She said nothing. Her breath was shallow with pain. Wind brought the smell of creosote and alkali. Somewhere a fence gate creaked and creaked in its hinge with no one to stop it. They turned toward a square of weathered boards and a short barn tucked into a sweep of scrub. Jonah pulled up. Home, he said. Ava slid down and hissed when her feet touched earth. She steadied, then looked past the cabin. 7 cedar posts stood in a line up on the rise, evenly spaced, no rails between them. They faced the sky like bones. Jonah saw where she looked and said nothing. He tied the mule, then opened the door and stepped aside. Inside was clean and spare. Table and 2 chairs, a small stove, a shelf with medical texts and a Bible that had seen hard reading. Above the door, a rifle sat on pegs. In the corner, a bed, narrow as a wish. He put bread and a tin cup of water on the table. Eat, he said, there is more. Ava moved like a deer used to snares. She took the cup, drank slow. Crumbs clung to her lip. Her hands shook only once, then went still. My name is Jonah Hale, he said. Ava Nantan. He nodded. He did not offer a smile. Your shoulder needs cleaning, he said, if you allow it. It is fine. It is not. He waited. May I? She looked at the floorboards, at his hands, the thin network of old cuts over the knuckles, the steadiness. She lifted her chin once. He set a bowl of water on the table, poured whiskey on clean cloth. The smell rose sharp and good. This will hurt, he said. I know pain, she said. He washed the wound with gentle pressure and no hurry. Sweat prickled his temple. Ava did not flinch. Only her breath drew in when the cloth found the deepest fire. Bullet graze, he said. Clean pass. 3 days, she said. Running. He dabbed salve from a small tin to the angry edges. Hold still. He wrapped the bandage neat. His hands moved like they remembered a language. He stepped away. You can have the bed, he said. He rolled out a blanket near the door and laid his rifle within reach. A line was drawn without words. Ava ate more bread in small bites. She walked the room with her eyes. A narrow box on the high shelf caught a bar of sun. She did not reach for it. Jonah put coffee on the stove. Smoke climbed and flattened under the roof rafters. Outside the window, the 7-cedar post stood stubborn against the hard blue. Wind brought a low rumble. Far off, heat made the sound bend. Jonah poured coffee, black and bitter. He did not drink. A knock came near noon. Walter Finch stood on the stoop with a crate balanced on one hip. He was older, spare, sun-cut, kind eyes behind wire spectacles. "Brought your order," he said, stepping in. "Flour, beans, salt, a can of kerosene." He set a small bottle on top. "For the sleepless," he said in a voice that did not carry. His gaze slid once to Ava, then back to Jonah. "You picked a loud place to do a quiet thing." Jonah kept his voice even. "She eats, she rests, that is all." Walter nodded. "Elias Crane has a long memory," he said, "and a badge." The words were plain as stones. Dust grew brighter in the doorway. Walter pushed his hat brim down and left. The day turned thin with heat. They made a stew from beans that did not ask for much. Ava dozed, sitting up. Jonah checked the bandage once. He refolded the corner with care. Hoofbeats came slow and sure and stopped in the yard. Jonah stood. Ava's eyes opened. She did not reach for anything. She just stood straight. 3 men walked through the doorway without knocking. The first wore a star on his vest and winter in his gaze. Elias Crane. Behind him, Boyd Tiller, with a fuzz of beard and nerves he could not hide. Mac Dugan, older, with a face like knotted wood. "Afternoon," Crane said. He looked around the room and missed nothing. "You keep 'em busy, doctor." "I am not a doctor," Jonah said. "That is a shame," Crane said. "Town could use one." He shifted his attention to Ava. "Name." "Ava," she said. "You speak it well," he said. The words were clean. The tone was not. He tipped his head toward the open door. "We have questions about homesteads burned south of here." "She is not your suspect," Jonas said. Crane's mouth smiled. His eyes did not. "I will decide that." He moved his palm along the doorframe like a man testing wood. "Mind if we look around?" "You are already in my house," Jonah said. Mac wandered the yard and the barn. Boyd circled behind the cabin. Crane's boots creaked across the boards. He glanced up. Above the door, the rifle watched him without moving. Boyd's voice rose from behind the house. "Sheriff, found something." They stepped outside. Under a flat stone wrapped in old leather lay a bundle of herbs, bone beads, a small charm. Mac nudged it with a boot. "Medicine stuff." Jonah's chest tightened. The bundle had been Sarah's. He had hidden it after the fever and never found the will to throw it away. "Explain," Crane said. "Old things," Jonah said. "Before." "Before what?" Crane asked. "My wife," Jonah said. "She is dead." Crane studied him, then the bundle. He looked toward Ava. "You will come in for questioning," he said. He did not raise his voice, but it cut. "No," Jonah said. Crane's hand rested easy on the butt of his pistol. "Careful," he said. "There is law in Redwater. It has teeth." Ava stepped forward. "I will go," she said. Her voice was steady. She did not look at Jonah. Jonah felt the old pull behind his ribs. He swallowed it. "I am coming with her." Crane shrugged. "Suit yourself." They tied horses at the hitch outside the Redwater jailhouse. Sunlight fell through the barred window and made a pattern on the floor. The room smelled like sweat and tobacco. 2 cells at the back waited behind iron. Boyd opened the right cell. Ava walked in. The lock took with a click. She turned her face to Jonah. The corner of her mouth did not move, only her eyes did. "I know his voice," she said softly. Jonah stood at the bars while the light crawled across the jailhouse floor. Ava kept her hands wrapped around the iron like it could bite. Her voice had been quiet a moment ago. Now the silence after it felt loud. Howie asked. "The fire at our lodges," she said. "Orders to burn." That voice, his. Jonah watched the shadow of the bars climb the wall to the calendar with last month still pinned. He did not argue with certainty. The door opened. Elias Crane came back with Mac Dugan and Boyd Tiller. He set his hat on the desk as if the desk belonged to him from birth. He leaned back in the chair and let it creak like a warning. "Let us talk plain," he said. He nodded toward Ava. "Where were you 3 nights ago?" "Running," she said. "From what?" "Men who killed my people." Crane smiled with only one side of his mouth. "Your people have been raiding homesteads south of town. 3 farms burned, livestock taken, children cut. He watched her face for a flinch and did not get one. Tell me where the rest of your camp is hiding, and this ends easy. It does not end easy, Ava said. Jonah stepped forward. You have nothing. You drag her in here to look busy. Crane tilted his head. Easy, doctor. He turned a paper on the desk with the back of his hand so the words faced him. Argent and copper consolidated reports green stone in this territory. That is wealth underfoot. Some folks would rather sit on sacred ground than take a fair deal. His eyes came up to Jonah. You understand a bargain, do you not? Jonah kept his voice even. I understand the shape of a threat when someone calls it a favor. Crane stood. The room changed when he was on his feet. I am holding her overnight, he said. She looks like a runner, and I do not like runners. Tiller, you take first watch. Dugan, get fresh coffee and a cot blanket. Reed, you are free to go or free to sit. Your choice. I am not leaving her here alone, Jonah said. Crane's eyes flicked to the medicine bundle on the desk where Mac had set it down. He brushed a bone bead with the back of his finger. Your dead wife collect this, he asked without a question mark. Interesting taste. Folks in Redwater can be touchy about bloodlines. He tapped the desk twice, flat knuckles a small drum. See you at sunup. He put on his hat and walked out into the white heat. The room sagged after he left. Boyd Tiller tried to look hard, but his eyelids were heavy, and his jaw still had the softness of a boy not long from home. Mac brought in a blanket and dropped it on the bench for Jonah, then went out to smoke beside the trough. There was a knock. Walter Finch opened the door with a basket on his arm and a smile meant for peace. Supper, he said. Martha would not let you starve. He set a tin plate and a coffee pot on the desk. Steam carried a smell of bean salt pork and something sweet. He nodded to Jonah and Ava, then to Boyd. Eat while it is hot. Boyd shot a glance at the closed door and then gave up. He shoveled fast. Walter edged closer to Jonah and lowered his voice until it barely stirred the air. There are 2 cups. The black one is strong enough to fix a bad night. The key ring sits on Mac's left hip. He did not look at the cell. Do not waste a blessing. Jonah held his gaze once, then cut it away. Thank you. Walter's hand brushed Jonah's sleeve a touch light as moth wings. He tipped 2 fingers and left the room the way he had come. Time slowed. The wall clock clicked a wooden tick with a tiny hitch. Jonah folded the blanket into a square and sat. He let his head tilt and his breath lengthen until Boyd accepted the picture of a man asleep. Mac came back smelling like tobacco and livestock. He leaned his chair against the wall and closed his eyes to half slits. He told Boyd to pour coffee. Boyd filled 2 tin cups. The black one steamed with a different heat. He drank and grimaced at the taste, then finished it because he was young and did not know any better. Mac took his with a grunt of thanks and drank slow. The clock pulled its hands across the face. A fly drew circles on the window glass. Heat faded until the room held a desert night cool that settled in the bones. Boyd blinked again, then let his head fall. The cup tipped and rolled to the floor. Mac's chair thumped forward. He swore once started to stand and sat right back down. His chin dropped to his chest. Jonah opened his eyes. He moved without hurry and without sound. He took the ring from Mac's belt like a man lifting a fresh egg from a nest. The keys chimed as soft as rain. He slid the right one into the lock and turned until metal kissed metal. The bolt drew back. Ava stepped to the threshold. She looked up into his face, all calculation in her, and something else behind it. You do not owe me, she said. Maybe I do, he said. They crossed the room like a shadow crossing the moon. The door hinges felt oiled and did not betray them. Outside, the street lay empty under a thin slice of moon that made the world look like a map. The wind carried the dry scrape of a tumbleweed down Main Street and the tin whine of a sign chain on a nail. Jonah kept them between the shade of buildings. He could feel the air of the jail door at his back until that feeling went away. The livery stable breathed warm animal smell. Horses shifted and stamped in their stalls. A roan pushed its head over the gate to nose his shoulder. Ava put a hand on the neck and the horse went still. Help you, a voice said from the dark. Jonah's hand went to the knife at his belt. Walter stepped into the lantern circle with his palms up. Easy. I figured you might need tack for 2. He set a canvas satchel on a bale of hay. Food-clean cloth, cartridges, a small flask. There is a folded paper with my pencil marks. Prospect No. 7. Devil's Spine. You can read a line the way a river reads a valley. You have done too much, Jonah said. Nonsense, Walter said. You saved my Martha when fever took half this town. A man remembers who lifts the weight off his chest. He tied a bridle with a quick, neat motion. Saddle the roan and the dun. Stay off the main road. The telegraph will be busy by sunrise. Jonah worked in the soft light buckles and leather, talking in small clicks. Ava watched the doors in the alley and the sky like they were all doors. When the horses were ready, Walter took Jonah's forearm and held it. Come back alive if you can. If you cannot make sure, truth does. Jonah nodded. Words would not lift here. He put his hand on the roan's withers and felt muscle ready to move. They led the horses out the back to avoid the street. The world behind the stable was a seam of dark between false fronts and the long lip of the arroyo. Crickets sang in the weeds behind the hotel. A dog barked once and then decided not to care. They rode with bodies close to the horses, heads low, reins slack enough to feel. The town fell away. The church steeple turned to a tooth in the dark. The telegraph wires hummed with a sound like bees far off. The wind came cold off the flats and carried creosote, ash, and a pinch of river somewhere underground. Ava sat easy on the dun like the saddle had known her a long time. Her bandaged shoulder was a pale mark in the dark when the moon caught it. Jonah glanced at her, and then at the road no one had built. They kept to the dry wash where hoofprints broke up fast. Stars pricked holes in the sky. Coyotes spoke to one another across low ridges. The night gave them room. By the time the eastern edge of the world softened, they had put miles between themselves and the town. Jonah slowed the roan and listened. Nothing but the horse breath and his own. He felt the map Walter gave him in his coat pocket like a second rib. A finger of light touched the horizon and then pulled back behind a sheet of cloud. Heat lightning flared on the distant plain. The ground underfoot changed to rock shelves that rang under iron. Jonah turned the roan toward a black cut that opened in the slope. The land fell away there in a narrow slot lined with basalt like stacked books. A dry trickle of sand moved at the bottom with a sound like the hush a mother makes. Devil's Spine, he said. Ava looked into the throat of the canyon and then at the sky. Storm, she said. He tasted metal at the back of his tongue. He led the roan down the slant. Hooves found purchase and then lost it and then found it again. The dun followed with her weight back and her ears tight. The walls pulled close. Heat rose off the stone into their faces. It felt like standing in front of an oven door. A rifle cracked behind them. Rock burst hand-high to Jonah's left and spat grit. He felt the kiss of a pebble cut his cheek. He pushed the roan forward and the horse leaped and slid and caught itself. Ava pressed the dun against the wall and guided it with one hand. She did not look back. The sky opened a little and a sound rolled across the stone low and long. The first fat drops tapped the black rock like fingers on a drum. The canyon narrowed again. The air went tight. The roan's breath blew hot on Jonah's hand as he took the next drop into the gut of the cut. He did not speak. He did not need to. Rain hit the rock like shot. In the slot of Devil's Spine, the drops turned to a sheet. Water ran in beads, then in ropes. The first surge hissed past their boots and vanished around a bend. Off the horses, Jonah said. They slid down. He slapped the roan's flank. The horse scrambled up a side shelf with iron scraping stone. Ava tugged the dun into a narrow pocket under a shelf of basalt. Lightning opened the sky and showed a wall of water shouldering its way down the slot. It gathered sticks, brush a tumble of old bones. The sound rose and filled the canyon until it pressed in their ears. They climbed. Hands found cracks warm and then slick. Jonah reached for a notch that was not there, slipped and caught himself on a lip that cut his palm. Ava braced under him and took his weight for one breath. The flood rolled under them brown and fast, and the smell of mud and desert grass rose with it. They reached a ledge the width of a beam. Rain blew in sheets. Wind pushed against them like a body. Jonah flattened his back to the wall and pulled Ava in under an overhang that was barely more than a long shadow. The water boiled and climbed on the far side, then fell. The canyon roared and roared. Ava pressed her arm to her side where the bandage lay. She looked at Jonah's cheek. A thread of blood had pinned a red line to his jaw. She tore a strip from the hem of her dress and pressed it. Her fingers smelled like creosote and wet dust. He let his head hit the rock and closed his eyes. He felt the heat of her shoulder through damp cloth. In the wash of sound, he found the small rhythm of her breath. She tilted her face toward the rain and caught a mouthful, then passed it to him in a tin cup. The water tasted like stone and sky. When the rain thinned and the thunder moved off, the flood still ran but did not climb as high. Jonah tested the holds above with his fingers. The stone was scraped and clean where water had scoured it. He climbed slow and careful. Ava followed light and precise counting steps with her breath. They reached the rim while the last of the storm walked away toward the flats. The world spread out with a dark clarity. Pools shone in hollows. The 7 cedar posts up on Jonah's ridge stood like strokes of ink against the bleached sky far behind them. They crouched under a shelf of rock and watched the canyon spit drift in broken branches. "Track's gone," Jonah said. Not all Ava said. "They will look at the river crossings. They will look for fire on the hills." Jonah nodded. He wiped his cut with whiskey, and it stung bright. He wrapped it with cloth from his kit. When he looked at his hands, he saw the steady again. "We need food," he said. "A coat for you, cartridges, needle and thread thicker than what I carry." Ava studied his face and then the blue distance. "The cabin," she said. "They will expect the road out. They will not expect the road back." He kept his eyes on the land and the way it drifted toward a thin line of cottonwoods. They started when the light softened, moving along the rim so the canyon hid them. Wet soil clung to their boots and made them heavier. Ravens rode the lift and watched with heads turned. Distant lightning stitched the far horizon. The air held the clean after-rain smell that comes once a season. By full dark, they had made it around the western lip and down into a low wash. They followed it until the sand turned to hardpan. The sky was clear. Stars like ice. Jonah took the compass from his breast pocket and set their line. He pictured the cabin as a small square in a wide place Walter's store 2 miles from it, the church steeple a finger. Near midnight, the smell of wood smoke lifted from the land in a faint ribbon. Ava stopped. She touched Jonah's arm and pointed. A coin of dull light moved inside the cabin window, almost afraid to show itself. Jonah felt his ribs tighten. "One horse," Ava said. She listened head-tilted. "One man." Jonah eased them into the juniper circled wide to the west, where the ground was broken by stone. The cabin sat in its usual quiet. The barn showed a lean flank. The 7 posts lifted out of the darkness like a row of small monuments. "Draw him away," Jonah said. His voice did not carry. Ava nodded and slid off through the brush, soundless as a fox. He watched her vanish, then moved to the rear window. The latch was where he had left it. He lifted the frame with care. The cabin smell came up at him, old wood and coffee. He let himself in and landed soft. The lantern flame burned low on the table. The stew pot was clean and upside down. A plate sat for one with crumbs of hardtack along the rim. The rifle above the door was gone. Jonah crossed to the bed and reached under for the medical bag. His fingers found leather and brass, and the weight of it made something in him ease. He set it open. Bandages, sutures, a folding saw. He packed salve thread, 2 needles, and the surgeon's roll. From the shelf, he took cartridges and slid them into his coat pockets. He opened the pantry and found salt meat and 2 sacks of beans. He strapped a blanket to the satchel. The small box on the high shelf caught the lantern light. He took it and laid it in the bag without opening it. A voice outside called to the dark. "Show yourself." Boots moved across the yard. The man fired at Brush when Brush did not answer. The shot made the air jump. Jonah waited for the echo to die. He took the floorboard near the table and pried it up with a butter knife. The wood came clean. He reached down and found a notebook wrapped in oilcloth. Sarah's hand had written the old routes in a tight script. Dates, weights, initials of men who moved freight for the mines when the silver still came. He slid the notebook beside the medical roll. Another shot ripped the night, then the sound of feet running. A curse thrown at the dark. Jonah went out the window and lowered the frame. He kept to the shadows where the cabin's bulk cut the light and moved fast through the juniper. He gave the yard a wide berth and followed the dry creek bed to the place where the line of white stones marked the old property edge. Ava appeared beside a mesquite at the same time. He did breathing a little hard. A scratch darkened her sleeve and glistened at the edge. Wood, she said, not lead. He touched the cloth near her arm without pressing. We will clean it soon. They put a mile behind them, and then two before they stopped long enough to cinch the satchel tighter and drink from the canteen. The night tasted of ash and wet rock. South lay open land and a sagging rail fence. East lay broken mesas with flat tops. North lay the line of low mountains that beat against the sky like a pulse. Raven Mesa, Ava said. Jonah took the compass again and set the red point. They turned their boots to match it. They slept for an hour before dawn in a fold of ground behind a stand of saltbush. When they woke, the world had gone pale. Breath smoked in the cold. They ate dried meat with teeth that felt too tired for chewing, then moved. By noon, the land rose under their steps. The air thinned. Water laced down from a seep in a hogback. They filled canteens and let the cold run across their tongues. The soil grew redder. Lichen painted old rock with ghost greens. By late afternoon, they stood in the shadow of Raven Mesa. The wall of it went up clean as a blade. No path showed itself to any eye that did not know where to look. Ava did not look with her eyes. She counted under her breath and ran her fingertips along the rock. She pulled aside a tangle of thorn and showed a crack just wide enough to admit a body sideways. Keep your shoulders flat, she said. The passage held the day's heat and smelled like old dust. Their shoulders brushed stone. Jonah felt the roughness take a thread off his coat. The dark took them. Ava counted again, low and even. The path widened and then tightened, then lifted in a stair that had not been cut but worn. Their palms found old marks made by hands that had gone before. They came out on a ledge that hung above a basin like a balcony. Wind took sweat off their faces. Stars were out in the east, where night had gathered first. The path went on along a seam in the wall. They followed it to a lip where the mesa top lay open and flat with juniper crouched low. From there the caves were a low line in a ridge, mouths so thin a shadow might not notice them. Ava crouched and read the ground. The dust held a smear near one entrance where a foot had slid and then held. A few short hairs, gray and stiff, had caught on a thorn at the height of a child. She touched the hairs, and then her hand fell to her side. Inside the first cave, the air was still and cool. The light of their torch turned the soot of the rock black as crows. Fire rings sat cold. A woven basket had tipped and let go of dried berries that lay like dark coins on the dirt. Near the back, a bow lay with the string cut, and a knife with a bone handle lay on its side. The handle held a swirl cut into it, a sign for water that moved and returned. Ava knelt and lifted the knife with both hands. Her jaw worked but did not open. She set the blade against her palm like a weight, and then slid it into her belt. No bodies, Jonah said. She nodded once. The yes did not mean hope. It meant a choice had happened, and the end of it was elsewhere. A narrow opening at the rear led to another chamber. They ducked through. The second cave held order. Clay jars sealed with wax. Blankets rolled tight. A bundle wrapped in painted hide set on a stone shelf. Ava eased the bundle into her lap, untied the thong, and opened it. Feathers, a small wooden figure rubbed smooth by years of touchstones, the color of forest, the green marbled with gold. Jonah took one and felt the cool in it. She tied the bundle and placed it against her chest. For winter and for sickness, she said. He filled canteens at a drip in the back wall. He wrapped herbs and placed them with his instruments. He had been told 1,000 times in other years to keep such things separate. He did not. A voice moved through the rock from the first chamber. It came soft at first, like a memory. Then the words reached them. Check the rear. There is another passage. The light of a torch stained the crack with color. Mac Dugan stepped into the first room and swung the flame. He took a bullet in the shoulder and spun against the wall. Jonah fired again into rock to keep heads down. The shot rolled through the stone like thunder trapped in a cellar. Ava pulled him toward a low cleft near the floor that looked like a shadow and nothing more. The escape passage was tight and smelled of damp rock. The air grew colder. Their hands found shallow pockets worn into the stone where feet could land. They climbed down without light. The sound of men shouting on the other side of the wall came and went as if the rock were a river and their voices were fish in it. The drop ended on a seam they could walk. A thin wash of night breath came up the passage. Stars showed as a thin band ahead. They came out on a small ledge on the western face. The wind pushed Jonah's shirt against his chest. The desert lay open and silver. Below, in the wide, dark, small fires burned at uneven intervals like eyes half closed. Voices went up and fell. A horse snorted, then another. Ava put her hand on the rock and closed her eyes. Jonah watched the fires and counted them without moving his lips. The knife at Ava's belt touched her thigh with a steady weight. The stone in his pocket pressed a cool circle against his heart. The night held. They slept in snatches and moved in long pulls. The mesa fell behind as a black plate at the edge of the sky. By the second night their food had thinned to small strips of meat and a handful of beans. Frost silvered the sage near dawn. Ava's arm swelled under the bandage where the splinters had burned the cut. At a break in a dry wash, Jonah boiled water in a cup and cleaned the wound again. He set out a needle thread and a small jar of salve. The air held the clean bite of cold iron and wild mint. "This needs stitching," he said. Ava settled her back against rock and opened her palm. She watched his fingers more than the tools. "Do it." He worked close. The thread drew a pink seam and tied neat knots that lay flat. His mouth was set. The old calm came down over him like a coat he had left on a peg and found again. Ava watched it take hold. "Better," she said. He wrapped the arm and checked his own cut. The strip of cloth on his cheek was brown at the edge where the blood had dried. He changed it and did not say whether it still stung. They kept to game trails where hard ground left only a breath of sign. Near midday they came on a small seep that laced the side of a bluff with dark. 3 men had reached it first. They stood with their backs to the rock and their mouths full of laughter. "Crane has a price now," one said. "Can you believe that? 500 for the doctor. 1,000 for the Apache woman. Dead or breathing. Makes no difference to the wire. Crane will be worth more alive if you can pry him loose from the badge," another said. "Mining company wants a clean face on their books." "Clean face," the third said. "Dirty hands." They filled their canteens and led their horses west. Jonah and Ava stayed flat in the cattails until dust took the men around a spur. The seep left a clean taste on their tongues and a twinge in the gut. Numbers had moved into the hunt. They crossed a high saddle as the light ran out of the day. The land fell into a valley tight with scrub pine and granite. A thin stream cut the floor with a bright line. Jonah's breath showed in small clouds. He rubbed it away with his glove and listened. The night had more voices than he liked. A shot reached them from the far ridge. Then another. A single horse pounded the valley floor with its head stretched and its rider pressed low. The rhythm was raw, like a heart punch. Ava touched Jonah's sleeve and slid into the shadow of a tree. He followed and brought the rifle up. The rider broke into the clearing at a dead run. The animal stumbled and caught itself. Blood had soaked the front of the man's jacket and blackened where it met the cloth. Elias Crane pulled at the bridle and swung wide. His hat was gone. His hair stuck to his skull. His hand pressed his side and came away wet. He saw them too late. The horse shied. Crane lost balance and hit the ground on one knee and then both. The breath left him. His gun tumbled away and landed in dead grass with a soft thud. Ava stepped forward. Her knife flashed once in starlight and then sat in her hand without moving. Jonah did not speak. He kept the rifle steady and watched Crane's eyes. Crane looked up at both of them. There was anger there and a slice of something that might once have been humor. He tried to stand. His leg did not answer. "You come to finish it," he said to Ava. His voice broke and came back as a whisper. "You should." Ava took one more step. She saw him in firelight again. She saw the star on his breast, the hand that raised and dropped with an order. Her breath shortened. She stopped. "3 behind me," Crane said. "No sense for patience. All sense for money." He nodded toward the dark line of the trees. "You can hear them if you stop your hearts a second." Jonah listened. Dogs did not bark. Men talked low. The metal of a stirrup ticked on a rock. Crane swallowed. "I know a hole," he said. "I know a way out if you want your skins to stay on. I can show a map you do not have." Ava looked at Jonah. The knife waited. "He killed my father," she said. Jonah's throat worked. His hands did not move. He did. The words fell and lay there. "Prospect 7, Crane said. Add it under the eastern ridge. Comes out clean in another valley. No one rides that mouth. The supports are old, but they hold." He lifted one hand and let it fall. "Your choice. Tie me or leave me. Either way, those boys take you if you stay in this bowl." Jonah kept the rifle on Crane and reached with his free hand. He pulled the coil of rawhide from his belt and tossed it to Ava. She bound Crane's wrists tight and clean. Her fingers were sure. She pulled a strip also across his arms and chest to keep his shoulders from doing what a man's shoulders do when he changes his mind. They lifted him between them. His breath leaked in hissed pieces. He gripped his side and did not complain. They moved through the pines toward the darker slope. A scar of tailings caught a bone shine on the ground. The mine mouth sat low under a fold of rock. Shoring timbers dark with age framed it like a doorway to an older house. Inside, air went flat and stale. Their lantern threw out a thin circle that pushed back the dark and no more. Old rails lay in the dust. The roof ticks and small runs of grit fell once and then went quiet. Jonah set Crane against the wall and slit his jacket where the blood had clogged. The wound lay high and right. The edge of it had that sticky shine a surgeon knows. "You need a hospital bed," Jonah said. "Got a desk instead," Crane said. He tried to smile. It looked like a cramp. Ava held the lantern. Her face was carved by the light. Jonah cleaned the wound and packed it with cloth. Crane's breath whistled, then steadied under the pressure of the bandage. Jonah tied it off and sat back on his heels. Crane's head went to the wall. Sweat ran in rivers. He watched the lantern with a dull stare. "You think you own any of this," he said. "You think law keeps order here. Law follows money. Money follows metal. Copper is milk for the future." His eyes slid to Ava. "We offered a price no one else had the right to offer. They said the land belongs to bones. Bones do not pay taxes." Ava did not raise her voice. "You burned people. You cut children. You call it a price." Crane blinked. The glaze lifted a moment. A small line at the corner of his mouth pulled tight and then let go. He said nothing. Jonah reached under Crane's coat and found the inner pocket. He drew out a folded packet, stiff with wax and dirt. He opened it under the lantern. The words made a lattice on good paper. Argent and copper consolidated, rights and terms, signature lines, a delayed payment clause. Half a map scratched on the back with a grease pencil showed a set of benches and a mark for Raven. He slid the papers inside his shirt. Next, he took the small notebook he had found under his cabin floor and checked it against the grease map. Freight marks matched points in the hills. The routes had a pattern. The pattern told a story. Crane watched him and shook his head once. "You play doctor. You play lawyer. You forgot how this place was built." Jonah did not answer. He stood and tied a strip of wood across Crane's ribs to keep him from tearing his own repair. The man grunted and did not fight him. They moved deeper. The tunnel angled through cold pockets and warm ones. In places it narrowed so the lantern brushed the wall. Old pick marks flashed and were gone. Their boots scuffed rust and threw a faint red dust. Once the roof cracked a small complaint, and they stopped until the wood settled and the sound sank back into silence. At a branch, Crane nodded left. Right goes to the Stopes. Left goes to the adit that breathes. His voice had gone to gravel. They took the left. The air found a little life. A strand of moonlight showed as a blade thin cut at the end where night waited. Jonah covered the lantern with his hat and let his eyes adjust. He heard nothing but their breath and the small sigh the earth makes when it gives a path back. They stepped out onto a ledge high above a different valley. The moon was down to a sliver. A wash of stars made light enough to move. The wind came sweet and cold. It smelled like pine and wet stone. Cranes sagged between them and then slid to the ground. Jonah checked the bandage. The cloth had gone dark again. Pressure slowed the leak, but did not seal it. He took a drink and gave one to Ava. He did not offer to Crane. The man slept with his mouth open and caught his breath in small snorts. Across the valley, a faint glow showed where a camp lay spread behind a line of rock. A horse blew once. A man coughed. The sound came clear and then bled into the dark. Ava crouched and listened with her head bent. Her hand went to the knife at her belt. She looked at Jonah. He looked back. Neither spoke. The mouth of the mine waited behind them like a throat. The night in front of them was open and sharp. The papers against Jonah's chest made a flat shape. The stone in his pocket stayed cool. The wind shifted. The glow across the way brightened by a shade and then steadied. They cut branches with a short saw and their knives. The wood was green and tough under the blade. Jonah lashed crosspieces with rawhide and stripped bark until a frame took shape. He spread his blanket over it and tied Crane down so the weight would ride even. The man woke long enough to curse in a voice that barely rose, then went quiet again. They moved at first light. The valley held a thin fog like breath on glass. Pinyon pine gave off a clean resin smell when the sun touched it. Gravel ground under the travois poles with a dry rasp. Jonah took the front. Ava took the rear and kept the poles from snagging. Her bandaged arm brushed the rawhide and left a small print where the cloth had wicked blood. They skirted the far camp by keeping to the shadow of the ridge. A whistle floated once across the plain, then nothing. A raven followed them for a mile, bored with its own voice, and then broke away toward the bright cut of the river. The land lifted and fell, lifted and fell. The travois wore two lines in the dust like pencil marks. Their shoulders burned, their palms grew hot and slick. They switched places without speaking. Crane groaned when the slope got steep and went limp with a heavy give that told its own story. By noon, the air had a high country chill. Water ran thin and quick in a creek lined with willow. Jonah dipped the canteen and watched silt spin and settle. He rinsed Crane's bandage and packed it again. The wound bled slow. The man's skin had turned the color of wasp paper. He breathed shallow to keep the pain small. They reached the crossing in the late afternoon. The place was little more than a clapboard building with a flag and a telegraph line that sang to itself in the wind. Two soldiers sat on the porch with their boots on the rail. A clerk with ink on his fingers looked up from a ledger when the shadow of Jonah's hat fell across the desk. "Name," the clerk said. "Jonah Hale," Jonah said. "This is Elias Crane, Sheriff of Redwater. He is wanted for questions you will want to ask on paper. He requires a surgeon. He carries documents you will want to see." The clerk's eyes sharpened. One soldier fetched a stretcher. The other opened the door to a small room that smelled like carbolic and old sheets. They took Crane inside and spoke in a controlled hurry. Jonah laid the folded contract on the desk, then Sarah's notebook beside it, then the malachite stone with its veins of gold. The clerk's hands hovered over the items as if they might startle. "This is a federal post," the clerk said. "You understand what that means." "I brought him here because of that," Jonah said. A young officer with a clean jaw asked questions. Dates, names, routes. Jonah gave what he knew and did not reach for more. Ava stood with her back to the wall and watched each man's hands. When she spoke, it was to correct a place name and a direction. The officer wrote quickly. He folded the contract into a file that already held other sins and sent a wire that rattled the building with a long rhythm. They slept at the crossing that night, not well but hard. In the morning, a doctor from the fort opened Crane and cleaned what he could. The sheriff lived with a gray face and a machine's breath. He signed his name with a hand that shook and talked when questions were asked in the right order. He told the shape of a deal and the price it set on fire. He said it with a flat stare, and no one in the room looked away. Weeks ran by without them. The wire carried a charge north and east. Argent and Copper sent men in good suits to speak for small men in bad hats. A marshal took a sworn statement. A judge closed a set of books and opened another. Redwater heard about it in the slow-way towns hear everything. Walter Finch wrote that soldiers had ridden through and asked decent questions. He said folks had stopped talking in the doorway and started talking in the street. 6 months later, the mountain light had a different angle. The cabin in Durango County sat with its back to a line of blue hills. Cedar posts stood in a stout rectangle around a patch of black dirt where herbs grew in neat runs. 7 posts formed the north side spaced true rails tight. A sign hung by the door on iron hooks, letters cut simple and clean. Dr. Jonah Hale and Mrs. Ava Hale, Medicine and Healing. Inside shelves held glass jars with labels in two hands. Willow bark, pennyroyal comfrey, and names in a language that ran like water over stone. A brass scale sat on the table. A stack of clean cloth stood next to a bone saw wrapped in oiled leather. The room smelled of alcohol mint and sun-warmed wood. A girl with a cough left with her mother cotton tied around a small jar and instructions folded and tucked into an apron. Jonah closed the door and leaned his forehead against the cool frame for a breath. He stood straight when Ava came from the back with her hands wet from washing and her sleeves rolled. She looked at him and at the empty bench and smiled from a place that had taken work to reach. "You have steady hands today," she said. "They behave when you are watching," he said. Children gathered by the garden fence and pointed at leaves while Ava named them. She showed how a plant tastes when it is right and how the same plant turns if you gather it wrong. The children laughed at the bitter faces of brave brothers. Jonah sharpened his scalpel and listened to the small sounds of safety, the scrape of a hoe, the clack of a jar lid, the soft call of doves under the eaves. A letter from Walter sat on the table with a blunt pencil laid across it. Walter's hand ran a line that said the Army Board had used Crane's statement and the company's papers to bring fines and a stoppage. He wrote that the paper in Santa Fe used the word reparations, a word with corners that cut and a weight that some folks handled with two hands. He said Redwater had not said itself right, but had at least said the words it needed to say. Ava read the line twice and held the sheet for the sun to make the ink thin. She looked toward the hills where the old paths lay, and then back at the room. She set the letter down and put her palm on the map that hung beside the shelf, the one with new names penciled beside old ones. In the evening, the neighbors came for poultices and talk. A rancher told a story about a mare that had foaled on her feet and never stumbled. A miner held his hat and asked about a pain that had started low and risen. Jonah listened and pressed with careful fingers. Ava mixed a tea that took the edge off and wrote the amounts in her own script. When the sun fell, the fence posts threw long lines across the garden. The air cooled in a way that brought out the smell of damp earth. A cloud gathered over the ridge without thunder. Rain came straight down soft at first, then heavier. The drops hit the cedar rails and made a sound like feet crossing a floor. Water ran off the roof into a barrel and raised a scent that felt like a door opening. They moved the jars from the sill and set a small stone there. The malachite caught a streak of late light and showed its green as if the rain had polished it. Jonah ran his finger along the edge of a rail to feel the fine beat of water. Ava stood with her shoulder touching his and counted the seconds between the first cold and the small steam of their breath. When the shower spent itself, the last drops hung from the cedar and made a thin chain. The sky cleared at the edges and left a strip of gold above the hills. The air held still. A neighbor's wagon rattled on the track and faded. Somewhere a child called a name and got an answer. Jonah closed the gate on the 7-post side and lifted the latch until it clicked. The click sounded right. He felt it in his hand. Ava took his palm and turned it over. The cut that had crossed his cheek had settled into a pale line. The scar on her arm had faded to a small rope under skin. They sat on the porch step and let the last light find them. He breathed in and filled his ribs until his chest ached in a good way. She leaned her head against his shoulder and did not speak. The sign by the door creaked once when the wind moved and then went silent. The stone on the sill glowed and cooled. The smell of rain on cedar lingered and made the night feel clean. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.